South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson joins us now. I believe, Congressman, you are outside the House floor. You've been voting for Kevin McCarthy ballot after ballot. Thanks for joining us. Does McCarthy have this wrapped up? What is going on behind the scenes to get him there?
Well, he doesn't have it wrapped up yet, but he's going to get there. And you're right to ask about what's going on behind the scenes. People have a tendency to focus so much on what's going on the House floor, but that's really performative. The real work is going on behind the scenes, as you said. And I've been in a number of these negotiations. I got to tell you, there are people who want to get to yes. There are smart people, the right people, people of good faith who every single hour are getting a little bit closer. Slow and steady is going to win this race.
Congressman, I've seen some bags of Chick-fil-A being wheeled into congressional leadership offices, some boxes of soda. So take us in the room. You say you've been in the room in some of these meetings. What's it like, not just the food on the table, but what's the kind of conversation that's being had?
Frankly, it feels good. It feels refreshing because it's real people, members of Congress talking to one another and not just exchanging the kind of bumper sticker slogans that politicians have a tendency to recite when they're on a network or when they're on the floor giving a speech. But it's real people talking about where do they have concerns? Where does this country need to go? What do our budget policies need to look like? How should power be constructed and deconcentrated with regard to the House and how it functions? These are conversations that probably should have been happening 2 years ago and 4 years ago and 6 years ago. This House has not been working like it should for a long time. When we land this plane, and we will, the House will be better because of it.
But Congressman, it's tough sometimes to land that plane, as you say, if the grievances are personal, if they're process-based, ideological, perhaps a bridge can be built. But if they're personal, and it seems certainly personal from Congressman Gates and a few others, how do you bridge that gap?
Yes, a number of the holdouts don't have policy concerns with Kevin McCarthy. They don't have leadership concerns with Kevin McCarthy. Or if they do, they're secondary to the kind of personal grievances that you're talking about. I think over time, as we go from a 9th ballot to a 10th ballot and from a 10th ballot to an 11th ballot, more and more those folks are going to realize that they cannot allow personal grievances to stand in the way of this House getting formed, these committees getting formed, and real work, real progress on the border, on crime and drugs in our cities, on inflation getting done. Listen, a deal is not going to come together instantly, but we're getting closer for that reason.
Everybody watching this, Congressman, wants to know, what does a deal look like and how do you get there? If Congressman Matt Gaetz, for example, of Florida, said, he told me a few minutes ago outside the House floor that he wants to see McCarthy's speakership in a so-called, quote, straitjacket or have McCarthy withdraw from the race. So he's probably a solid no forever. If you have a few solid no's that are just never going to come across the line, does that mean some Republicans have to vote present? How do you get to that threshold where McCarthy wins at this point?
So first off, I wouldn't put too much stock in some of these quippy public statements by members of Congress. Sometimes they're delivered to try to gain more leverage in negotiations. Sometimes they're delivered just so that somebody can get attention from the folks back home. When Kevin McCarthy wins, I think it's going to be with 218 votes. But there are scenarios, like you described, where people either aren't here or they choose to vote present, whereby Kevin McCarthy could become Speaker with fewer than 218 votes. This is not just theoretical. Nancy Pelosi, John Boehner, Newt Gingrich, they all became Speaker with 216 votes. So it's absolutely possible.
Let's say Congressman McCarthy leans a little bit to the right, cuts a deal with some of his critics who are on that side of the political spectrum. Do any of the traditional Republicans revolt and say, hey, that's a step too far. We can't agree to a deal where the Freedom Caucus gets all of these things?
So I'm chairman of the Republican Main Street Caucus. That's a group of between 70 and 80 conservative pragmatists who want to get things done. These are kind of like some of the traditional conservatives you're talking about. And of course, there are some concessions that have been made that irritate them, but no deal happens easily in this town, in Washington, D.C. So almost by definition, when you get a deal, everybody involved feels a little irritated. They feel a little uncomfortable. And we're getting to the point where you can tell a deal is within reach because everybody feels a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's how we get this done.
Congressman Dusty Johnson outside the busy House floor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.